The majority of us go through the educational system and life and never learn what's right for us. Maybe it's time for you to create your own definition of success. And that's where we come in. This is the SUCCESSology podcast, here to supplement the traditional education system and life with real-world skills and knowledge, helping you create your own definition of success. SUCCESSology. Here's your host, Rajdeep Singh.
Hi, Elena, and welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you here. And, it is so good to have you in person because, as I mentioned, I've been alone in India for 8 months. And then when I even come here, there's still restrictions of having people over. But having actually someone, in person is much nicer and much more personalized. So without further ado, would you like to sort of introduce yourself a bit?
My name is Elena Agaragimova. I come from a background of education and academia. I've been in the UAE for 7 years. Prior to that, worked in various organizations, institutions around the USA, as well as the Middle East. Had the pleasure to visit over 13 different countries for recruitment purposes, education purposes. So I'm very passionate about education and understanding kind of, what's next and what are the similarities around the world, and just preparing the future generations, essentially. And in recent years, I've gotten into a little bit of a business. So I've started a company, co-founded a startup as well within the productivity and well-being space, and here we are having a chat about future of education.
That's awesome. Future of education, to me, it's such an interesting topic because it's the thing is, I've started to learn more and more, and the more I learn, the more I see the benefits of the the shaping the future from right here, right now. So it is often said that we should look at the past in order to sort of know the future. And I'm sure you must have come across this post. This was by Prince EA, where he was comparing, say, a phone 100 years back to phone now, a car 100 years back to car now. And when you look at the classroom 100 years back to classroom right now, it's almost the same thing. So, it's true for the entire education system, I think. It is outdated, so there's no doubt about it anymore. And as a result of this outdatedness, I think it leads to a loss of creativity. There is no personalized learning. And the biggest issue I have personally is there's a big disconnect between what the theory is and what the real applications of the theory are. So, between the real world and the theory that universities claim to teach, there's a big disconnect. So in your sort of, say, personal and professional opinion, what are some of the steps that can sort of be taken to ensure that upcoming generations, your kids, your grandkids, they don't have to go through the same education system as we did?
It's interesting that you mentioned about the theory part. So I think it's important to also understand that when education got started, in fact, so yes, it was meant to sort of teach that theory, right? Academia, right? And it wasn't necessarily meant to prepare you for the real world. But what we had, though, in the 1950s and 60s, we had apprenticeships. So you learn theory, and then it's mandatory that you go and you work with that craftsman or that doctor, literally right after your studies on almost daily basis. This is what you did. You had apprenticeships. So somehow along the way we've lost that. And now we're just focusing on theory mainly. So I think that's important to remember because, again, it's, higher education and education in general, it's a business. At the end of the day, it's a business.
It is a big industry.
It's a huge industry, right, at the end of the day. And should it prepare us for the future work? That's a big question for everybody, right? Because that's the kind of debate right now happening in higher education. But at the end of the day, if you look at it as a business, if you want to survive it as a business, you need to make sure that you're offering something competitive. So when it comes to educational institutions, right, I see three responsible parties. Number one is the individual, of course, and that can include the parents as well, so the family environment, right? Like, what are your parents doing to sort of provide you that support outside of your regular studies? Then we have the institutions, so the university or the school, and then we have the corporations. So all three really need to work together. And right now, the way it works is none of us are working together. Everybody is operating at their own sort of silos, right? So it's about bridging that gap. Like, how do we bridge that gap between these three parties, essentially? Because it doesn't work if one of them is missing. It's a full package, essentially.
So basically, what you're saying is that if we can create relationships between, say, individuals, say, students and parents and teachers and the overall system, and there is a synergy involved, then we can see some change. We can hope to see some change.
Absolutely. And when it comes to institutions as well, what's happening a lot now is that there's a huge push for student engagement and these sorts of things. It's always been there. Like, the whole the experience that you get on campus is like very rich, and this is what it's all about. They make it like this is what it's all about. That interactions and those events. But what they're missing is an important part, which is the real world experience. And right now, if you look at even institutions in this part of the world or anywhere in the world, like I'm telling you, I've been to like over 13 countries, visiting higher education institutions, speaking with parents and students, and I can tell you that majority do not ask for more than a couple of internships before students graduate. Another example, I was speaking at a big university here, a well-known university, not to name names, but one of the really quality universities, and I was giving a talk about the future of work, and I asked the people in the class, and there was about 70 students there, and I asked them how many of them have done an internship, and mind you, these are juniors and seniors. A handful raised their hand. At junior and senior level, they have not yet done an internship, volunteered. They have not had real world experience. Like, what have you been doing? You know what I mean? And so it's no longer enough. And it's not about sort of disrupting the higher education. It's about, if you want to survive as an institution, which means you're a business, you still need to make money, you need to offer alternatives. Sure. Right? So you need to, or have some kind of alternative education. And at the end of the day, 4-year degrees is not for everybody. Right? So it needs to start as early as school. So I'll pause here. You want to say something? I feel like you want to say something.
So basically, what really fascinated me is, as I said, we learn from our past, and you mentioned in past we used to, with the education was supplemented with real world experience, and for some reason we've forgotten that. And what happens is, when you go to university, as you said, these juniors and seniors, a very handful of them raise their hands whether they've done an internship. But what happens is, when you enter the workforce, when you enter the workplace, employers ask for like 3-4 years of, say, leadership experience from like fresh graduates. So how there's such a, I think the entire system is, it's even hard to explain that there's something that students think is true, and then when they enter the real world. So I have a question for this as well. But because we're talking about this, I interviewed Jeff Baito, and he works with a lot of HR departments, and he asked them, how much do you think, because every university, they pride themselves in, our graduates are the most employable ever. And then he works with a lot of HR, and they're like, no, they're not. If you ask a university, they're like, okay, our students, they're 9 out of 10 employable ready. And the HR departments go like, no, they're not. They're like 3 or 4, and we have to train them. So there's such a big disconnect between what the universities think is true and between what the reality is.
And absolutely, and to be fair, it's not easy. Like, it's not an easy problem to solve, right? This is why everybody's talking about it. So there's certain gaps that need to be filled. So on the university side. On the university and also parents' side, parents need to play a role in this, because oftentimes, when I spoke with parents, they say, my son or daughter, they're studying and it's already a lot. What do you mean it's a lot? How many hours do you spend in university every week? How much are you actually putting into the study? At the end of the day, you cannot study all of theory about economics, right? No. Study what you need to study, right? And then implement it. So I think that it's not acceptable anymore that all we're doing is studying. It's not enough. You need to study from a freshman year. You need to be studying, and then you need to be doing volunteer. You need to try things. It doesn't mean it's going to be your career. Experiment. You need to understand what is it that you're good at, essentially? Because the funny part is that we ask students, and I was asked this when I was studying at the age of 19. My advisor was like, well, what do you want to do? And I'm like, I don't even know what I'm going to have for dinner tonight. You want me to figure out what I want to do? True. And the funny thing is that what I wanted to do didn't exist. So what I wanted to do is, he asked me, so what do you enjoy? And I said, I really enjoy talking to people, like to learn different cultures. I'm not a 9-to-5 behind a desk person. And I would love to travel and I just want to do something interesting. There was no major that fit that criteria. And so I chose international studies after changing 5 times my major. And the funny part is that, and then I've had about 17 different jobs, which is a whole story on its own, because I've experimented everywhere, right? And then, so today what I do, in fact, is I talk to a lot of people. I help them in some way with their career development, right? I create products and services to help others. I travel the world, at least pre-COVID, right? And I learn about different cultures and how can we best sort of cater to our clients around the world. So, but there was no major for that, So at the end of the day, like as universities and university students and parents, we need to understand that we need to get experience. It doesn't need to be this formal internship. It can be a volunteer. It could be whatever it is, anything, job shadowing, anything. On the company side, another thing they need to tackle is the fact that HR is overwhelmed. A lot of HR, L&D departments, there are some good ones that create these sort of opportunities for students come and really explore their offices and the way of life at work, etc. But majority do not, and that's because they're overwhelmed, and it's usually not a priority, and it needs to be a priority. Just as for institutions, career development needs to be a priority, for companies, talent development, that talent recruitment really needs to be priority beyond what they're doing right now. Sure.
True. So, you mentioned that everyone is on their different thing. And I think as a society, we all know there is a flaw in the education system I'm talking about. And to fix the flaw, we often blame, the first one to get blamed is the student, and then the teachers, and then the parents, and then finally the government, right? But, I personally believe that the way to change education system is using an inside-out approach. So instead of asking the system to change and waiting for the system to change, why don't we ask the students to change? And I personally believe this can happen if there is a synergy between, say, a formal education and personal development. As you rightly said, most people don't know what they want to do, right? And I think that's because we, even in the education system, we've sort of forgotten our values, what we stand for. And as a result, when you enter the real world, no one's going to handhold you then. You have to choose for yourself. As a result, you're always confused. Right. So what I want to ask is, how might we design, say, the modern learning experiences where students are sort of encouraged to take charge of their own learning?
Sure. So I think it's important to also recognize that although many people are not sure what they want to do, usually what happens is that it's not that you don't know what you want to do, it's that there's no box that fits you when it comes to university or corporate career. Meaning that when we go into universities, we're continuously told that the hot majors today are A, B, C, and D, right? Or, business administration is still one of the top, it's like the number 1 most popular major.
That's how I made my university decision. I Googled most paying majors and most paying courses. Management was up there, so I was like, you might as well do it.
Exactly, but that's a problem because it's not a problem. It's if that's what you want to do, beautiful. But at the end of the day, we cannot judge our future career based on a salary. Because at the end of the day, yes, do lawyers and doctors make more? Does everybody need to be a lawyer? No. Can everybody be all these, or top engineers? No. Right. So it's also being very clear about what is the innate in you and what is it that you are interested in. Because what happens is, if we are going towards something we really dislike, it's going to drain us. We can learn, but it's going to drain us. So it's important to understand. But because there's not a lot of majors for the future, and that's why the companies like Google now, they're introducing their own sort of 6-month courses, etc. All right, and the Coursera's of this world. If you want to learn, you'll learn and you'll get the skill set, right? So if the university degree, or if your parents are saying, listen, go to finance because you're always going to find a job, right? So our parents mean the best for us. So the challenge here is also the parents and their fears of not having their child be stable, which makes sense, stable in terms of life and career and finances, right? Which is important. But it's important to understand that if you're able to figure out what is it that you're good at, right? What is it that you enjoy, which value, what you need to learn, and then create you can almost create a position for you, for yourself. And with the world of gig economy and startups, and that's kind of the route that we're going, there's going to be more opportunities. So on that side, we need to really focus on that. I think that's the missing piece. And coming back to your question, I apologize, I went off a bit, but coming back to your question in terms of how can we
design, say, modern learning environments where, in school, how do we study? We study what the structure tells us to do. We have a curriculum, right? And that's all we study. And the curriculum is so heavy, it's so intense that students don't have time to study something else. So if my sister, for example, she wants to be a psychologist, right? But her studies are so intense that she doesn't have time to follow her passion, which is her art. So what I'm asking is, how can we create a system where, a self-learning is not only, it's encouraged, basically?
So a good question. Number one, I think it's about making time as well. So studies can be intense by all means, but it's about making time, because there's a lot of people that are studying full-time, working part-time, so in part like in Europe and in the US. I myself, I've been working since I was 15. I was always studying, I've always had a job. And it was not a problem, like I did just fine, and so did a lot of my peers, so I think it's about, again, how do we find that balance? How do you balance? Because again, you can study psychology or any degree, but then you need to, at some point, you need to say, wonderful, I'm going to focus on this. But if you're studying alone is not going to get you there. But if you try to say, what do I need to know to fulfill my requirements for this class? And then now I need to apply this. I need to make time. Right, and you're absolutely correct that we just need to learn how to learn. Most times we don't know how to learn because what are we taught in schools? Memorize, study this. We're taught what to learn, which is why we find ourselves in situations where we don't have time. We're overwhelmed with study. No, we need to figure out a way that works, because studying all of a particular major is not going to benefit you in your career. Your brain does not, it cannot hold that much information, right, or retain so much. But you know what it holds? You study a little bit here, you work a little bit here, you try. It's a combination. You need to make time. And so universities need to make time and make it a requirement to where some of the credit hours, not just to an internship in your junior, senior year, no. Listen, go study what you need to study. They can even study on their own, right? You don't need a lecture. Now you can learn anything online. So as a university, how are you going to provide them an opportunity to first teach them how to learn versus telling them what to learn?
Exactly.
Right? So, and this is the disconnect. So it's almost not the student's fault, because students, at the end of the day, yes, they need to take responsibility, but we don't know what we don't know. We have blind spots as humans continuously, which is why the whole idea of mentoring helps, experimenting, because we don't know. You need to be curious. And universities and parents need to encourage that curiosity. When you encourage curiosity, then you say, I wonder what else I can try. And then that builds resilience, that builds character. It's a full snowball effect from there.
True. So that's wonderful advice. So, just a follow-up question on the self-learning. So I'm a big believer of continuous learning, but we often make the mistake of, as soon as we graduate from university, we stop learning. And we get into the whole 9 to 5, say the routine, right? So my question would be, in such a competitive world, being able to learn continuously obviously provides you with learning new skills, provides you with a competitive edge, right? So can you sort of explain the difference between education and learning? And what are some of the ways through which, say, people can become lifelong learners?
Sure. Very, very good point, actually. And a funny example here. So part of my work is I actually deliver soft skills leadership development sessions to mid-level professionals. So part of my career development practice is working within education space, but also with mid-level professionals. And I am continuously astonished that when I speak with people that are mid their career, so 35, 40-year-olds, X number of years of experience, reached to a certain level, and we're talking about topics like, I don't know, growth mindset or emotional intelligence, right? Those sort of hot and trendy topics for the future. You'd be surprised how many it is the first time they're talking about these topics. It is the first time they're talking about these topics, and is it everybody? No, but it's a majority. It's the majority of the workforce, which is why a majority of the people are not satisfied in their jobs, is because we don't pause and we don't continuously learn. And that's why the mid-level is the hardest level to break to senior level. And you know why many don't make it to the senior level? Because they don't make time to learn. So how do you actually make time to learn? Number one, you should stay on top of what is coming up in your industry. Looking at, just understanding what's happening and reading the room essentially in your world of work, right? So staying on top of the news, like, reading something as Business Insider, right? Some, the Harvard Business Review articles, the McKinsey reports, the BCG reports, they give a lot of information about what might be coming up. You can start to see trends. Nobody's going to tell you because nobody knows. Nobody really knows what's going to happen. But we know that technology is going to be something that we need to focus on. We know that certain industries are going to die down, others are going to come up. We know these things. You get this from future work reports. As basic, like just starting with that is enough. Another one is surrounding yourself with people that you aspire to as well, right? So, and it doesn't need to be that face-to-face. It could be, those podcasts, like listening to podcasts, educating yourself, getting different perspectives, right? Versus being in the same circle, clocking in, clocking out, avoiding being fired, and then Netflix and chill all day. You know what I mean? So it's on weekends where, we're spending our times, like, what are you spending your time on? This is the question we need to ask ourselves. Like, what are we spending our time on? And there's a lot of, with the access to information and resources and people, and especially in parts like in the Middle East, like it's easier to connect with people because of the culture. It's a little bit more approachable, right, in a sense. So who are you spending your time? What are you spending your time on? Because you don't know what you don't know. None of us do. We all, like I said, we all have blind spots. So we need to surround ourselves. We need to get out of our comfort zones, because it's unacceptable to me that the age of 35 or 40 and older, we have not discussed, you've never taken something about emotional intelligence or understanding the importance of cultural intelligence in the workplace, or understanding of behavioral psychology. So as a leader in an organization, if you don't understand the behavioral psychology, and if you don't have self-awareness, if you don't have self-awareness as a leader, we have a problem.
We have a major problem. Yeah, what's interesting is you just mentioned how our mind learns. We're not very good at keeping in information. But what happens is when you start reading these different, say you're reading Business Insider, you're reading Forbes, you're reading some other journal, you're reading some study, what'll happen is your mind will store just a little bit of information, and over a period of time, you'll start seeing insight which not a lot of people will see. And that's you being able to remove your blind spot. And that's very interesting to me.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying. That's a very important point, because when people say, well, you should read, and then they think that if they read for like a month or they read a couple books, it's going to, you don't even know sometimes the impact it's going to have. But you need to stay on top of what's happening in your industry. You need to be sort of forward thinker, right? So proactive, that's the word I'm looking for. Proactive. We are reactive. Like now, many people who got left without jobs and made redundant, right, around the world, many of them found themselves that they can only do one thing, and that's not enough anymore.
That's a big issue. I personally know people, say this individual, it's a family friend of ours, they were in banking, and that's all they knew. They got fired, and now they're moving back to India. So the life has gone from being fairly well off to being, retreating back to, say, now wherever they're going. It's just because they weren't able to adapt. And they weren't able to, the point is I'm not saying you need to be jack of all trades, but at least have don't put all your eggs in one basket. That's, the easiest way to sort of put it.
You've been listening to the SUCCESSology podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you like the show, make sure to leave a review on Apple Podcast and share it with a friend. That would help too. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hook up with Raj on his personal LinkedIn at Rajdeep Singh, on Instagram at Rajdeep.1997, on Instagram at SUCCESSology.podcast, and on YouTube at SUCCESSology Podcast, helping you create your own definition of success. Make your own path to get there quicker. Until next time, this is the SUCCESSology Podcast signing off.